Welcome into a special episode of Zoom Action. Zach Geoghegan, Brandon Ramsey here, our KSR basketball breakdown show. We've got a good one in store for you today. We're going back to the Gonzaga game. Just happened over the weekend. It ended at like 6 in the morning. I'm not entirely sure. My sleep schedule is still kind of thrown off from that one, but Kentucky came back from a 16-point deficit to win that game in overtime. Massive, massive neutral site win for the Cats. Going to be a huge resume booster going forward. But we're going to just jump right into things here. Brandon Ramsey has 3 plays picked out from this one, and we're going to they're all different. We got some offense, some defense, some late game stuff as well. So we're going to kind of just jump right into it here. We will start with, let me go ahead and add you in here, Brandon, your screen. Boom. So we're going to go straight in. This is the first play we're going to talk about. It's a defensive play. Kentucky was really, some of the headline grabbers from this post game were the 1-3-1 zone that Mark Pope employed for pretty much, I think, like the 18-minute mark of the second half was the first time we saw it. And it was kind of in and out over. Brandon and I were talking off camera. We couldn't really find like a rhythm or a pattern of why he was throwing it out there, but every time he did, it seemed to work. So this is one of the first big 1-3-1 possessions that really stand out, at least in Brandon's mind here. A lot of the 1-3-1, as you'll notice as we kind of go through here, is really just a token 1-3-1 to kind of as it quickly dips into a man defense, whether it's on the pass or the drive or the screen or whatnot. But Brandon, go ahead and run us through this first 1-3-1 zone play. Tell us what stuck out to you, why you decided to run this play, and just kind of the general line of questioning. Why was the 1-3-1 so effective against this Gonzaga team?
Yeah, so we saw Kentucky obviously go to some of these 1-3-1 zone looks in the second half. I believe I marked it down when I was rewatching the game. It was somewhere around like the 17:30 mark in the second half where we first saw Kentucky implement this 1-3-1 zone. And what I thought was interesting was that, and as Zach alluded to, him and I were talking about this. I've mentioned it a time or two on Twitter as well that Kentucky on my rewatch, Kentucky played less zone than I kind of felt like they did, and certainly
Hmm.
less zone than I think some people kind of attributed to the second half, where it was kind of like it kind of became this narrative of, oh, Kentucky went to 1-3-1 zone in the second half and it won them the game. There was quite a bit of it. There were several possessions, but so often, aside from maybe two possessions, it would switch to man on the first pass of the first drive, whatever it may be, like Zach mentioned. So, and the reason I say that it isn't to, like I'm not, talking back to anybody who made a big deal about the zone. It was extremely effective because it limits their driving ability. It inhibits them from getting into their ball screens, which, what was it in the first half that worked so well? It was Ryan Nimhard and Graham Ike just kind
Yeah.
of dicing us up on these middle ball screens. Well, it's a lot harder to middle ball screen a 1-3-1 zone because there's just people in the way of penetration. But the reason I wanted to kind of clarify the zone was that Kentucky just deserves a lot of credit for guarding better. Like
Hmm.
this wasn't some like, well, we had a smart coach throw out a gimmick defense and we kind of stole one in Seattle from Gonzaga. No, a lot of it was we just executed better defensively, and you'll see a little bit of that in this clip because it's not just straight 1-3-1. Kentucky starts in a 1-3-1 zone defense. This is from a sideline out of bounds, so the shot clock starts at 20. But you can kind of see almost immediately, like this is a different Gonzaga possession than what we saw a lot of in the first half. You have Ryan Nimhard just kind of dribbling the ball out at half court, no movement. Now we're already down 15 seconds into the shot clock. So, Kentucky's wasted a half of a shot clock before Gonzaga really gets into anything because they have to identify the zone. They're looking over to Mark Few. All right, what do we do? Now we're into a little bit of a ball screen here, which Kentucky just switches. That was a common theme in the second half. Kentucky was just very willing to switch a lot of the ball
Hmm.
screens, and it helped keep a guy on a guy. You don't have to help as much off the ball. You're always kind of with the roll man, and I thought that really took away. That's why Ryan Nimhard had 1 assist in the second half compared to 7 in the first half, was our willingness to switch some of these ball screens. So now you're just straight into man-to-man. Take Owe closes out. Here you have Kobe Brea. Once again, there's a switch on the handoff. Now, already the ball hasn't even sort of gotten penetrated at all. We haven't gotten a paint touch. It really hasn't hardly moved. Gonzaga players are most of just walking around. We're already down to 7 seconds here on the shot clock. We try one more ball screen. We slip it, duck in here. We're down to 2. We're down to 1. And Kentucky gets a shot clock violation from this defensive possession. And again, it started with kind of stagnating the Gonzaga offense with the 1-3-1 look. And then we were able to stay between them and the basket and keep a guy on a guy. because of switching the ball screens and handoffs once it went man to man. And that 20 seconds ended up going really quick because Gonzaga had to spend half of that time figuring out what defense Kentucky was in. And that's what is so effective about switching up the defensive looks. And I think that's, why you went from, what Kentucky gave up 50 in the first half and then 29, or I believe it was in the second half. So that's a pretty big difference. And certainly, some of the switching of the defenses deserves credit for that second half defensive success.
Yeah, I think what made this zone so effective was because of kind of what we were saying earlier, is that it was just unpredictable. They couldn't really tell when it was going to happen. They didn't really know exactly when Kentucky was going to. I mean, pretty much like you said, most of the time they went almost immediately into a man, but there was a couple of possessions where they ran the 1-through-1 the whole way down. I know there was one, I think the first time they did it where they ran it through the whole shot clock, Gonzaga came up with a miss. I think the very next possession down, they might have gone 1-through-1 pretty much the first 15, 20 seconds before they ended up maybe finding a way to switch it, or just Gonzaga got up a shot or something like that. Um, but from a technical or from a player standpoint, Brandon, like when you're already 20 seconds, 15 seconds down, and then Kentucky just switches their defense like that from maybe a 1-through-1, from the 1-through-1 to that man, how disorienting is that really for a player? Is it just enough, like 2 or 3 seconds in their head? Is that just enough time to throw them off, where it
Yeah,
throws off the whole offensive possession?
it's all about just sort of keeping the offense guessing and keeping them on their heels a little bit. In the first half, Gonzaga was comfortable. They were able
Hmm.
to play the sort of offense that they wanted to play. They want to set a million middle ball screens. They want to throw it to the roll man, and they want to score in the paint. Well, in the second half, they had to spend as much time figuring out what to do as they actually got to spend executing what they wanted to do. And I think that was the biggest difference. You just make them a little less comfortable. You're more unpredictable defensively. And like I mentioned, the 1-3-1, it's perfect at limiting some of that penetration. It's harder to ball screen. You're not going to be able to throw the ball inside nearly as much. And then as soon as you kind of figure out how you want to attack that, now all of a sudden we're in man. Now you got to go back to figuring out how to execute your plan against man. So I do think it was a brilliant halftime mix up. And I mentioned this on another show, I think Sunday after the game, was Kentucky was, I think, lucky in this sense that kind of the first thing we went to worked because we didn't have time really to keep throwing stuff against the wall. We had to come back from 18 down. But I
Hmm.
also think that this is just an example of some of the things that Coach Pope has up his sleeve. Like this time it was a 1-3-1 zone look. Like, well, if I had to guess, we're going to see some 2-3 zone at one point from this group. We're going to see like some extended full court pressure from this group at some point. Like it just so happened that the first thing we went to against Gonzaga worked to a T. But there's going to be a different game down the road where maybe we need to see a different defensive wrinkle, and this was just a perfect example of some of the in-game adjustments that this coaching staff isn't just able to make, but I think just as importantly they're willing to make. And I
Hmm.
think that's something that maybe in years past, there's just been some stubbornness of like, well, not only do I want to win, but I want to win in a specific way. Whereas now it's like the only thing that matters is figuring out how the heck to win today's basketball game. And if that means we
Hmm.
have to play 1-3-1, if that means we have to run a million sets, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, we're going to, empty up we're going to empty the clip and figure out how to win today's basketball game.
I think another byproduct of that 1-through-1, you kind of touched on it as well, is it just took Andrew Nemhard out of being able to just kind of pick and roll Kentucky to death. I think I believe it was on this show where you said you'd rather him just kind of step back and shoot a bunch of threes than get in the paint and work his way around. That's pretty much all they were doing in the first half. Graham Ike had 18 points. A lot of them, some of them were just kind of him just shooting over the top of another guy, but a lot of it was getting into the paint with Nemhard. And then in the second half, it was just kind of Ike having to do it on his own. And even though he still ended up scoring 10 points in the second half, it just felt like it was a lot harder for him to get those points. Makes life more difficult for Nemhard. What'd you say it was? Seven first half assists to one in the second half for
Yeah.
Nemhard.
Yep.
So you that's right there. That's kind of exactly what you're looking for, and it obviously paid off. Like you said, I couldn't find. I was looking that whole second half. I was like, is there any pattern to how Pope is? Is he doing it off every other made basket? Is he doing it off? Off. How is he just rolling out the zone? Is it every three possessions? Whatnot? But it really just there was no rhyme or reason. It was just kind of whenever he felt like he wanted to throw it out there, and he would obviously quickly go into man, and it just did enough, I guess, to really throw off that Gonzaga team. So we will go ahead and we'll jump right into our next play here. We're gonna flip to the offensive side of the floor. We've got kind of a counter play to something that was ran earlier in the game. It results in Jackson kind of coming around a double flare. That play doesn't play out how they want to, so they flow right into a zoom action. It results in Otega Owe feeding Andrew Carr, who pretty much, I mean, was Mark Pope's guy the whole second half, which we've kind of noticed now. Last two big games when Kentucky needs a bucket, Pope usually finds a way to Andrew Carr. Um, and it's just a lot of free flowing stuff going on here, as Brandon was telling me off screen. Just a lot of movement cuts. You eventually get to a spot where you find your zoom action, your bread and butter. Ends up being an Andrew Carr, just pretty much wide open dunk there. Brandon, restart this play for us. Take us into your coaching mind, because let me use the exact word you said here. Elite offensive counter was the term you described. So go ahead and tell me what you saw here. Take me into the mind of Coach Ramsey.
Yeah, so I watched this play no fewer than probably like 20 times yesterday because I was just so excited about how unique and creative this offensive action is. It
It took me
was
20 times to kind of understand what exactly was happening. So,
one. So imagine how hard it is to guard in real time when it's hard to understand even when I'm trying to explain it. Um, but you begin here with something that looks very similar to a play that Kentucky has ran several times throughout the season, and even I forget exactly how close it was to this possession, but earlier Andrew Carr had scored off of a back screen here where Jackson Robinson curls in there. He would set a screen on number 33, and Andrew Carr would just kind of cut down here towards the block for a catch. Earlier, it was Kobe Brea who fed him for just an automatic layup. Well, this time, because Gonzaga's already seen that action, Coach Pope has a little counter to it. Instead of setting the back screen, you have essentially what turns into a double flare screen. So Andrew Carr and Brandon Garrison set the flare, and then Jackson Robinson is curling over the top to the rim. As you see, man, he follows my arrow almost perfectly. That's awesome. And
you've seen this
we
play
get in there.
20 times, huh?
Yeah, like right now, I mean, you probably have him there. Like
Hmm.
Owe might have been able to deliver that pass and get Jackson a layup. I mean, EK is kind of lurking, so he might have blocked the shot. He might have been able to steal it. Who knows? But we end up just reversing the ball, and now you really are like this all because it happens so quickly. It looks like this is all part of like a called half court action, but like this is really just offense. Like Kentucky's just playing at this point. That initial kind of counter to the double flare, that's the play, and now they're just free flowing. So you get in to a little ball screen here. Andrew Carr looks, he's not super comfortable coming off a ball screen, so he pretty quickly turns that down and looks to get in to some zoom action. Because of the way the floor is balanced, this is a staggered zoom, so you have two guys setting the down screen with Jackson Robinson coming off. They keep the handoff there, and he keeps turning it up. Now you get it to, they kind of toss it to Otega Owe. Andrew Carr rolls to the basket. Spacing right here, like, Nimhard's wanting to stay with Jackson Robinson. Even Huff, isn't too far off of Brandon Garrison. He had already made his three at this point. You're certainly not tagging very much off of Kobe Brea there. So you have Andrew Carr, kind of by himself here in the paint. One thing, if you watch the play back, like, just let it roll a little bit. Watch how much Jackson Robinson runs
Hmm.
on this play. Like, he's covering like a quarter mile in one offensive possession just with how much he's running around here. And look, like he hardly ever even touches the ball, but it's just such great movement. And, part of him getting back here to the deep dark corner,
Gravity.
like it, yeah, there's gravity there. And that helps get this, which is the highest percentage shot you're going to find in basketball. So it was just a beautifully designed play. I love the counter aspect to it to kind of throw them off of something that they probably thought they knew what was coming and then they didn't. And then it just shows how far along Kentucky is at just flowing through their offense and how high IQ these veteran players are to just sort of get to these actions without having to look over at their coach and have, Coach Pope tell you what to do. This is all just free flowing and it still results in this good of offense.
Well, that was the first thing I asked you when we first looked at this play. I said, "Is this two plays in one? Like, is this like two called plays out in one?" Because I guess I just didn't kind of understand that all these players can be just not on the same page. Essentially, they're all on the same page. They're all kind of thinking alike. That you can have Otega Owe know that he's got Kobe next to him in the corner and Jackson next to him in the corner, and he can flow right into a zoom action out of that. After that first action doesn't go the way that they want. So it was cool. That was the word. It's just very cool that they are all able just to be on the same page. The chemistry that you obviously develop over time, but having a lot of veteran players, I'm sure helps doing that. So this was an awesome play. I'm glad we picked that one out. But we've got one more that we're going to dive into at the towards the end of the second half here. All right, and we'll flow right into our final play here that we're going to talk about in today's Zoom action. This is play actually tied the game up. This was, I think, the first tie since like very early in the first half, and then Kentucky went on to obviously win it overtime. Um, but this play here is a little bit of a wrinkle of a play that we've actually covered twice already before on Zoom action. We know one was at the very first play against Kentucky Wesleyan. The second time, I'm almost positive, was the very first play of a game. I don't know if it was the game after Kentucky Wesleyan or the game after that, but it's essentially the same play, just with like a little bit more of a wrinkle to it. So it revolves around Otega setting a couple of screens, Jackson getting the ball to Amari, and then on Otega's second and last screen, pops open Andrew Carr in the middle. And at this point, Andrew Carr had already had maybe 8 or 9, 10 points in this second half. As I just mentioned, Pope goes to his guy at the end of this game, and you get Andrew Carr with a really clean looking shot that ties this game up. But Brandon wanted to pull this one just because of the fact that we have talked about it so many times already, and it just continues to work. And it doesn't work against just the bad teams too; it works against the good teams as well. So, Brandon, close us out here. Tell us what you saw on this play here.
Yeah, it's just fun to see, especially as a fan, where you can kind of start to get a feel for Kentucky's playbook. Where I think even some casual fans could watch this play and be like, "Oh, hey, I've seen that before," and that's really cool. That's one of the goals of this show too, is to show you some of the X's and O's, and maybe you'll start to recognize plays like this, because clearly it's something that Coach Pope and the Cats are very comfortable with. But like we said, this was literally the first play of the Coach Pope era in the first exhibition game against Kentucky Wesleyan. And then now it's used in literally the biggest spot of the season to date, where Kentucky needed a bucket to tie the game, and they did just that. You get two Otega Owe screens, as Zach mentioned. The first one is a back screen here. And what's important, same thing I talked about way back in episode 1 of Zoom Action against Kentucky Wesleyan, it's important that Amari Williams gets this catch a couple feet off of the block, because you have to give Andrew Carr space to cut into. If he were to get this super low, I guess he could just score it himself. That would be fine. But in order to really run the play out, he needs to come out a step or two to get the catch, as you see here, getting the catch here as opposed to a couple feet in. So that's good. Otega Owe now sets the little down screen, cross screen, whatever you want to call it, for Andrew Carr, who curls towards the ball. And as Zach mentioned, he was going to score this in one of a million different ways at this point in the game. He was absolutely cooking, whether he needed to get to the turnaround, whether he was going to drop step on the guy and go score it. This ball was going to go in once he got a catch with 2 feet in the paint. Like, there was no stopping Andrew Carr at this point in the game. This kind of flips his hips a little bit, gets to a little turnaround jump shot. That's a high percentage shot for Andrew Carr. It just is. And, as I've mentioned on a couple different platforms since the game, I think that you're going to have to see some more set plays, specifically some more set plays to get Andrew Carr post-up opportunities as this season goes on. I think that's going to stick. Are you going to see, 20 half-court set play calls like we pretty much saw in the second half against Gonzaga on a game-to-game basis? Probably not. Kentucky's still going to be at their best in transition and free-flowing in their offense. But, getting, like I just mentioned on the last episode after the Clemson game, like 1 to 2 more set plays per game, I think that's what we're talking about here. I think that, just manufacturing some of these good looks, some of these, easier offensive execution plays, I think that will be something you continue to see, whether you're playing Gonzaga or Colgate or Louisville or Brown or, the gauntlet that is the SEC schedule. I think some of those things, and including this action that we just walked you through, you're going to continue to see that pop up through the rest of the season.
Brandon, we talk a lot about wanting more Kobe Bryant shots. I want more Andrew Carr shots. He's averaging 7 shots a game right now, 1.5 threes a game. Probably one of the more frustrating things right now is having to watch Andrew Carr turn down shots. I want him to shoot more. I don't think 7 is nearly enough shots per game for a guy of his caliber. So I want to see more shots from him. It doesn't even have to be the set play stuff like you're just talking about, but if you can mix in a couple more for him a game, or if he can just show a little bit more willingness to shoot the three ball, I think that would go a long way for him. I don't know if you agree on that or not, but um, otherwise, I think we're done. I think we're going to wrap it up. So this was kind of a surprise episode that we just wanted to throw out. We got, what is it, Colgate on Wednesday, Louisville on Saturday. So we got some more fun games coming up. Brandon, anything else you want to send us off here with, or?
I'll wrap up by just, I mean, I'm glad you said what you said about Andrew Carr because I think that coming into this season, probably aside from Jackson Robinson, Andrew Carr is probably the second most. This is going to be a poorly constructed English sentence, but I think people thought that he was probably the next most likely to be the best player. Is
Yeah,
where I was trying to go. And
yeah,
quite frankly, Jackson Robinson nor Andrew Carr have been that to this point in the season. It's kind of been Otega
no,
Owe and Lamont Butler, honestly, which is fine. And I don't know if that'll continue over the course of the season or how it'll all shake out. But I think that for Kentucky to remain a top 5, top 10 team in the country, for Kentucky to compete for an SEC championship, for Kentucky to compete to go to a Final Four, which are I think at this point all fair aspirations for us to have.
yep,
I think Andrew Carr getting 7 shots a game is not going to be top 10 Kentucky. That's not going
mm,
to be SEC champion Kentucky. That's not going to be Final Four Kentucky. I definitely want to see him shoot more threes. I think he's a guy that needs to make 35 or so threes this year. Like we're talking about like one a game. I want to see Andrew Carr make 1 3 a game on average. And then, yeah, he, shots like we just saw to tie the game. There are, several. I mean, trust me, I could have sat here with an hour with you guys and gone through second half set plays for Andrew Carr. You can go to my Twitter and see most of
there's
them
a
in my,
lot of them.
yeah, like that was like probably 8 of my, post game my Twitter thread was just, Andrew Carr got a bucket this way. Andrew Carr got a bucket that way. Like I said, that's never going to be like the crux of the Kentucky offense, and it probably shouldn't. But can
Mhm.
it be a higher percentage going forward? Absolutely. And I do think that the best version of this Kentucky team has Andrew Carr playing like he did against Gonzaga more than anything else.
Yeah, I've complained a lot to you and Steven in our group text about Andrew Carr. And I think what I've figured out is the reason I complain is because he just doesn't shoot the ball. He doesn't shoot it enough. And I want him to shoot the ball more because it's clear that he's good. And it's clear that Mark Pope trusts him to go get this team buckets when they need them. We've seen it twice now. As I said, Gonzaga and Duke, when they need buckets, Mark Pope goes to his guy. So if he needs to draw up more plays for Andrew Carr, I think that's perfectly fine. I also think that Andrew Carr probably turns down at least 2 threes a game. So you can fix both those things pretty quickly and maybe get his shots from 7 to 10 a game. And I think, yeah, you're going to be looking at a much better version of the player than we've seen, other than, when Kentucky really needs him is when he steps up, which is fine, I guess. He doesn't have to go off against the bad teams, but if he wants to play well against the good teams, that'll usually work out in Kentucky's favor. Um,
Somebody really smart once said, "Shoot 'em all."
Shoot 'em
And
all. Shoot 'em all. When did
I
that
forget
start? Was
who
that
that
Kellen
was, but
Grady?
yeah,
Did that start with Kellen Grady, the shoot 'em all?
it started with Emmanuel quickly.
Emmanuel quickly? Okay, gotcha.
Yep,
Yeah,
shoot 'em all,
and we've
Emmanuel.
got we've got a bunch of them on this team. We got a bunch of shoot 'em all guys. Yeah, so the Brandon Ramsey tagline still lives on, and it definitely lives on with Andrew Carr. Need more shots from him. But otherwise, folks, we will see you all next time. This is another episode of Zoom Action. We'll catch you later.